payroll side of things, compensation side of things. As far as compensation is concerned, the fundamental unit that we define in the application is called as an element. Element is any component of pay or compensation that is given to an employee. Anything, whether in cash or non-cash form. So it can be salary, housing allowance, transport allowance, medical premium, bonus, vacation, leave, uh, car, house, okay, uh, pension fund, gratuity, whatever you are giving to the employee, that is called as an element and is assigned to an element, to an employee. Only those elements that are assigned to an employee are processed by payroll. Anything that is not assigned is not processed by payroll. And these elements, they differ from legislation to legislation, that is from company to company, country to country, sorry, country to country. Every element is grouped or classified, called as classification, as earnings, deductions, employer charges, voluntary deductions, information, so on. The information type of element is used to capture anything that you need for non-cash benefits. So that is usually not paid to an employee. That is for any internal calculations, additional information that you want to track for the employee. Classification varies from country to country, that is from legislation to legislation. Remember that. Classification will vary from country to country, from legislation to legislation. Elements can be recurring or non-recurring. Usually, recurring elements are entered once and paid in every pay period. Basic salary is an example. Non-recurring elements have to be entered in each pay period. Why you have to be entered? Because they may vary from month to month. In 1 month, somebody is working overtime, they will get paid overtime. In another month, they will not be working overtime, so they will not get paid for the overtime. Salary is the recurring element paid to any employee. We call it regular salary, basic salary, whatever you may call it. It is the recurring element. Medical premium is a recurring element deducted every month based on their contribution. Bonus is a non-recurring element which is paid to employee as and when declared. Overtime is a non-recurring element which is paid to employees when he works additional hours. So these are the examples of recurring and non-recurring elements. Okay. Recurring element, you assign once and every pay period it is processed. Non-recurring element, it has to be assigned in every pay period. What is a pay period? Pay period is the duration in which the salary is being processed. For example, it can be your monthly, weekly, bi-weekly, semi fortnightly, fortnightly, or in that fashion. Okay, that is the pay period. So when we define an element, we have to define an element, and there is something called as a priority. Priority controls the order in which elements are processed. So priority is assigned to a classification by range of numbers. So one can be from 1 to 1000 for information classification, 1001 to 2000 for earnings, and so on. Termination rule means what happens to the element when the employee leaves the organization. For example, employee resigns on 15th of June 2020. If the termination rule says last standard process, that means the employee will be processed in the final payroll, which could be, if it is a monthly one, 30th of June is the last payroll. Last standard earning date, which is the actual termination date. So the element end date will be 15th of June 2020 because he has resigned on 15th of June. So that will be his end date. So when there is an end date, the element is end dated. You saw when we terminate, you have to put a termination date, right? So that is the date on which elements will be end dated. Was not resolved. Yes. Final process date is set to a date after which no further element can be processed for the employee. Okay. Now, sometimes what happens after the employee leaves, there might be additional benefits payable to him. For example, overtime, bonus, and for the period that he has worked. So in that case, there might be a need to process these elements even after he leaves the organization. Input value. Every element has one or more than one input value. Input value is anything that is required to process the element. Let's say an basic salary is 10,000 and HRA is 50% of basic. So we'll have the HRA as an element where the input value will be percentage of basic. So if somebody is getting 10,000, what the application payroll will do is it will look at this 50% and do 50% of his basic, which will become 5,000. That will be paid during the payroll. Elements of earnings, deductions, and other classifications have an input value which is called pay value by default, created by the system. Information type of element will not have any input values by default. We need to add them as per our need. Pay value is used by payroll engine to put the final amount payable to the employee against that element. Let's say basic salary is 10,000, HRA is 50%. So the pay value on HRA element will be 5,000 like I explained here. Now, if the person is working 15 days, then pay value will be half of that. So which will become 2,500. Input values can be of type, number, character, date, days, etc. So you can have a drop down also list of values. You can have some kind of minimum, maximum values also. You can have an input validation formula, which is there to check the values being entered by users. Now, one very important thing when we define an element is the eligibility rule for an element. So the eligibility rules defines who is eligible for the element. It is linked to workforce structures, that is department, job, location, grade, position, payroll, or any combination of that. What does it mean? You can say somebody in the location of, let's say, Lakshadweep or Andaman Nicobar, they will get an hardship allowance. They are living away from the mainland, so they are undergoing hardship. Or in the army, someone is located at uh, Siachen Glacier or in a conflict zone, then they will get some hardship allowance. So that can be linked to the location. Okay. Or somebody is working in the furnace, maybe the job of a boiler operator. He is working day in, day out in front of fire. So that has a toll on his body. So he can get certain benefits for working in a um, different kind of environment. To allow all employees to get an element, we can define a blank eligibility rule which ensures every employee is eligible for the element. If an eligibility rule is not defined, one cannot assign an element to the employee. Eligibility rule also holds the costing or accounting information. This is something that you must define. If you define an element but you do not define an eligibility rule, then you cannot assign it to an employee. Usually when we want to give it to all employees, we just define an element and save a blank eligibility rule. We leave it open. So this is the overall element design. We'll come back to this a little later because we have different things which we haven't talked about. For now, this is what we have talked about: element, input values, eligibility rule is linked with element that will be deriving based on the employee's employment. Okay, based on the employee's employment date, uh, the workforce structures, you will find them in the element entries. Okay, also when we do that change salary, there is a salary basis over there. So that salary basis is linked with the grade, and grade is linked with employment. So that is how all of these things tie up together. Hmm. So now when you do the practice, you will be doing an element which is called as XX basic salary. Replace XX with your initials. It will be a flat amount. When you define the element, I'll show you, you can define a flat amount. You create a eligibility rule for all employees. You create a salary basis. We'll create a salary basis called XX monthly and link it with this grade, so that when you do the salary change and the person has a grade, then you will be able to see the message as well as the comp ratio. Practice 2 is we'll create an HRA element where HRA input value will be percentage. Minimum will be 40, maximum is 60. Between 40 and 60, it will not allow you to enter anything outside the range. And you will create a eligibility rule for all employees. All elements for now created for all employees, because if you define something, then you will have to ensure that it is fulfilled. Assign the HRA element to the employee and enter a percentage. Similarly, you can create another element of type deduction. You have an element called XX bonus, which is non-recurring, where XX is your name prefix. This here you can put a minimum 5,000, maximum 2 lakhs, and anything outside. This will be a non-recurring element. HRA is recurring, salary is recurring. Remember that, okay? Eligibility rule is for all employees. And you can go to person management, element entries, and you will see the list there. Assign the bonus element to the employee and enter an amount. Similarly, you can create another element of type deduction. These are all earnings. Okay. Here is another practice. Those who complete those, you can try this out. This is like a challenging one. An element is called PF employee contribution. This will be voluntary deduction and it will be a percentage recurring. There'll be another element called PF employer contribution. That is also recurring, but its classification will be employer liabilities. And later on, when we do the formulas, you can put a formula there which will look at the percentage, if it is 8.33, 12.33, whatever it is, and look at the basic salary, and it will derive the net value out of it. You can link the formula with employee contribution as direct and employer contribution as indirect. We'll see those. What does direct, indirect mean? Okay. Next, we'll go on to salary basis. What is salary basis? Salary basis describes the duration of the salary which is entered for an employee. So it says whether it is monthly, weekly, annually, or hourly. The annualization factor converts the entered amount into an annual figure. There is an annualization factor which will convert that into the annual figure. So if you enter, let's say $10,000 per month, it will multiply it by 12 and make it 120,000 per year. If you enter 1,000 per week, it will multiply it by 52 and make it an annual figure. Okay. It links to the grades through the grade rate. It also links to the element and its input value into which the salary is entered in the element entry screen. So you have the element and you have the input value. So the element input value is the salary which is entered in the element entry screen. Salary basis is linked to the employee through the change salary screen. All of you must have seen when you are entering the change salary, you can see the salary basis. System validates the entered amount against the grade rate for that grade. If the value is outside the lower or upper limits, then a warning message is displayed. If required, user can change the entered value or continue with the entered value after receiving the error message. All of you must have seen that error message that comes up when you enter a value outside the range. So in summary, what is a salary basis? Salary basis links your employee with the duration of the pay. Okay, how long, whatever you are quoting, how long is that value for? If you are giving an annual figure, let's say somebody is getting $100,000 per year, so the annualization figure will be 1. So the system will do that for you and you can compare the value that it's an annual figure. Next is the payroll relationship. You have all defined payroll relationship. So what is payroll? Payroll defines the frequency of payment for an employee. How frequently is he going to be paid? It can be weekly, semi-monthly, or monthly. Okay. It's great you are being paid weekly, right? You will be paid every 7 days. But unfortunately, you will be paid 1/4 of your monthly pay. So that way, you end of the month, again, you get the same amount. So don't be very excited about it weekly. But weekly, semi-monthly is twice in a month. The payroll will be done, and monthly. Every employee must be assigned a payroll to get paid. This is absolutely mandatory. Every employee must be assigned a payroll to get paid. Payroll defines the payroll period start and end dates. It creates the calendar of periods based on the first period end date. Calendar of periods based on first period end date. Every payroll will have payroll periods which will have the start and end dates. So that payroll period is where you will be entering your elements. So if it is recurring, you will enter in one period, it will be valid. Thereafter, if it is non-recurring, you have to keep entering it in every pay period. Number of years of calendar to be defined can be specified to create the calendars. So calendars will show all the payroll periods that are applicable for the payroll. Number of years of calendar to be defined, which you can specify. Calendars can be opened as and when required. So it can happen that you initially create a calendar for the next 1 year. Towards the end of 1 year, you can open up another year, and in that way, you can proceed. Name of the periods can be modified manually. Okay. Your default system will create some period names, 1, 2, 3, along with the name of the payroll and start date, end date, like that. And you can change that. So you can say Jan, Feb, March, followed by the year name. But that has to be done manually. One can define calendar of payroll activities using offset. Offset means you can specify what is the pay date, pay slip date, entry cutoff date, processing date based on the date for which it has been assigned. Okay. So you can say, like, all of you are paid probably on the last day of the month, right? So that is your pay date. Payslip date is the date that appears on the payslip. It might be 31st or 30th, depending on whether it is a 31-day calendar or a 30 days calendar. Entry cutoff date is the date by which all the entries have to be sent. For example, uh, overtime, then your shifts, or somebody sending reimbursements, or companies provide vehicle reimbursement and all those kind of things. So by that cutoff date, it has to be sent. Processing date is the date on which payroll is processed. Usually companies have a calendar based on which this is processed. Then this is created in the system. You can take an export out and put it up on the notice board, or you can display it on the intranet for other employees, for the rest of the employees to know what is the schedule of payroll processing. Now, when you define a payroll, you also need to assign the payment methods. Okay. Payment methods, the payment method that you are assigning to the organization is the organization payment method, and the payment method that you assign to the employee is the personal payment method. This payment method that we are talking about is the payment method for the company and their payroll and their bank information that is held in the system. It is linked to payroll as the default payment method. So we will create a payroll. You can have a start date from 31/1/21 or 23 or 22 so that you get some pay periods in the past also. And you can start maybe earliest. Don't start just from January because you will not be able to make any entries in December, November. So when you are processing the payroll, it is better if you have multiple pay periods so that you can process every month. Okay. Any questions, anyone? Any questions on payroll relationships, salary basis, elements, input values?